Well, again, thank you for being here today, friends, and welcome to this space. I am excited to welcome you to our 75th online gathering for congregational leaders across the country. This monthly gathering is called Courageous Leadership, and it's sponsored by ELCA's coaching ministry. I'm Jill Beverlin. I am the coordinator of coaching for the ELCA, and I'm one of your facilitators today. As a reminder, we are creating and holding a safe and brave space in these gatherings for you to bring the truth of who you are and how you are doing. These conversations are an intentional step for us to live more fully into God's dream for us as the body of Christ. So friends, I do hope that you are continuing to see and experience the light and love of Jesus moving boldly in, through, and around you in this season of Epiphany. On Monday, we observed Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and this week continues to bring additional reflections on this powerful leader. He is known as one of the most influential voices in the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr. helped change the course of history, and it's wonderful that we continue to celebrate his legacy, and we are reminded of just how true his words remain today. So with that, I'm having trouble with my screen, friends, so I beg your patience with me. Okay, so with that, I want to share with you just a few quotes as we lead to the introduction of our guest speaker today. So here are a few words of wisdom from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And listen to the call to courageous leadership found in these immortal words. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? All labor that uplifts humanity has dignity and importance and should be undertaken with painstaking excellence. The ultimate measure of a person is not where they stand in moments of comfort and convenience, but where they stand at times of challenge and controversy. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And so friends, again, we appreciate that you are here today, and I am so excited and honored to welcome to this space ELCA's Director of African Descent Ministries, Nicolette Penaranda. Thank you for being with us today. And friend, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And hey, y'all, I hope everyone can kind of hear me well. I am curious, before I get started, I definitely don't know most of you. And I would love it if you would be willing to go around and maybe just introduce yourself and your role, what you do when you're not sitting in meetings like this, would be really awesome. And then we'll get into the good stuff. So maybe we'll do a popcorn style. And I think everyone knows Jason and Jill. I know Jason and Jill, so I'm gonna throw it over to the next person, and let's get started with Wendy.
Hi, I'm Wendy Abrahamson. I serve at Our Savior Lutheran Church in Pompton Plains, New Jersey.
And would you be willing to just call on someone else?
Sure, Kathy Boyer.
Hi, I'm Kathy, and I'm the Church Council President at Christ Lutheran in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. And I will call on Tammy.
Hi, I'm Tammy Devine. I'm a deacon in the ELCA. I am part of the ELCA coaching ministry team, and I also do coaching through Divine Coaching. I'm passionate about health, healing, wholeness, justice, and that's all part of the healing piece. And I will call on John.
John Paulson. I serve congregation in South Central South Dakota, Washington Springs. My passion is connecting people and resources and organizations for mutual benefit.
John, will you call on someone else for me?
How about Sylvia?
I'm Sylvia Mueller. I'm with Light of Christ Lutheran Church in Turlock, California, which is in the Central Valley. And I call on Jill.
I'm
Boston.
Jill. I'm Jill Boston, and I am a lay pastoral care minister with Advent Lutheran in Mill Creek, Washington, by Everett. And I call on Joanne Larson.
I'm Joanne Larson, and I'm an ELCA coach located in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And I call on Karen Battle.
I'm Karen Battle, located in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm retired, but I have a spiritual direction ministry as well as a Reiki. I'm a Reiki practitioner and an ELCA coach as well. So I now call upon Wendy Abrahamson.
I've already gone. So,
what about Wayne?
there you
All I see is the first name Wayne.
Wayne, you'll need to unmute.
Thank you.
I'll try that again. Wayne Heinzelman, retired pastor, Reading, Pennsylvania, serving 2 congregations, waiting for or about to call pastors or part-time pastors. So it's a busy retirement. And the picture behind me is Yellowstone. How about Janice?
Good afternoon. I'm Janice Hawley. I'm a pastor here in Creveport, Missouri, which is St. Louis area. And I'm also an ELCA coach. And so I call on David Trott.
Good afternoon. I'm David Trott. I'm pastor of Peace Lutheran Church in Bermuda. I serve as a ELCA coach as well. And yeah, I don't know who has gone. Call on Pastor Amanda.
I'm Pastor Amanda. I am interim pastor at Gloria Day and King of Kings Lutheran churches in various parts of Long Island. We're part of a 3-point collaboration thing. Yeah, that's me. And I call on Libby.
I'm Libby Howe, and I am a pastor. I live in La Crosse, Wisconsin. I used to serve as the assistant to the bishop and the DEM in the La Crosse area synod for about 13 years. And I'm just on January 10th beginning a new position with Wisconsin Council of Churches. And I'll be working with leaders and congregations on how they integrate and incorporate justice and peace ministries into the congregational life. And I will call on Carlene.
There. Hi, I'm Carlene Rhody. I am a joint parish pastor in rural South Dakota, just north of Sioux Falls a little bit. And so I have 2 churches, and then in our area we are very pastor depleted. Several churches are looking to find call, and so I find myself busy helping out in other congregations as well when there are funerals or other things like that. So yeah, South Dakota. And let's see, then I call on Chad Hubner. Is Chad there? Or do I need to call somebody else?
Hi, everybody. I just got on having some computer issues. So I missed our instructions for introductions.
Simply your name and your role.
Sure. Chad Hebner, pastor and campus pastor at Christ Lutheran and the Bridge Campus Ministry in Athens, Ohio.
Awesome. All right, I think that's everyone. Does anyone? Yep, okay, great. And I really appreciate that. It's just really helpful to get a sense of who I'm talking to and what kind of work that y'all do. And I know this is coming from a place of coaching. I've been really fortunate to have a lot of really great conversations with Jill and a whole bunch of other folk. I actually prepared this for my DEM, Director of Evangelical Mission meeting yesterday. And I'm just gonna kind of go through this with y'all too. And I wanna just be very transparent. I recognize that, you know, certain things here may not fit for you because you're not a DEM, but there's a lot of important content that I'm hoping you can receive from this. Okay. And so it's just like chicken, right? You know, spit out the bones, but, you know, take the meat. So I started my role at the African Descent Desk back in October. And I'm sure like anyone who has gone into a new role, it's been kind of a whirlwind. And so defining my work has been a challenge, especially when at times it feels like there's not much agency to do actual things that my role should do. However, the way I describe it, as I accompany more than 200 African descent congregations, roughly 400 roster leaders and seminarians, and actively try to resource our communities to thrive in the world today. So part of my role, I also act as an advocate for folks with when tension occurs in the church. I ask the difficult questions around disenfranchisement of folks in the margins. I oversee the African Descent Strategy team that has spent the last decade, if not longer, trying to implement this plan. And sometimes I even get asked to preach. I actually got to preach probably about an hour and change ago at chapel. So my energy is a little low, but my heart is there. But I'm really not here to bore you with my job, but more of my findings and my hopes for our church. So I am going to ask y'all some questions because it seems like everyone's in a lot of different places in the country. And I invite you to respond to these questions in the chat. Okay. Do you know how many African descent or even just ethnic ministries and missions are in your synod? And I say like that because I recognize some synods here may not necessarily have African descent congregations, but you might have Alaska Native or American Indian congregations. You might have Asian or Pacific Islander ministries, you know, in your communities. Do you know how many of ethnic ministries are in your synod? Do you know how many non-white candidates for ministry are in your synod? And do you know which stage they are in the process? That doesn't relate to you so much. But do you know how many African descent or non-white roster leaders are in your synod? And how many of them have full-time calls? Now, if you can't answer any of those questions, you know, my immediate prayer is that we learn these numbers, and not just for my community and the African descent community, but for any other ethnic ministry, because our numbers are so small that what I cover is the size of the synod, which means what you may or may not have in your synod is the size of a conference at best. And that's obviously with the exception of a place like Metro New York, where there's almost 30 congregations and missions alone for African descent ministries. I believe that we need to know this because ethnic ministries are almost forced to have different ecosystems than the greater church because of, drum roll please, racism. And now I know that there are many folks here who may struggle to believe that racism in our church is so bad that we need to be having these conversations. But I'm coming to you as a queer Black woman with an MBA who had to wait almost 2 years for a half-time call that couldn't even get me health insurance. So seriously, even your roster leaders can tell you stories of being called the N-word and ran out of town, of congregations that conspired against them and restricted all of their power, of Black churches that were shut down faster than their struggling white counterparts. These things happen, and they very much happen, not just in the African descent community, but in a lot of different ethnic ministries. But I'm going to now continue to speak from my position, but I want you to understand that this really can be applicable to all. But did you know that African descent leaders more commonly go into ministry at an older age than their white counterparts? Meaning that out of the dozens of candidates that I have spoken to in the last few months, only 4 of the 53 that I know are under 30. And I have no doubt that that number is a little off, but I want us to take a look at what that means. 1, we're assessing that many are second career folks, meaning we come into this work with a healthy amount of work experience, and sometimes even with additional master's degrees. Many of us come from different traditions, meaning that we have a vast understanding of theology, and we selected the ELCA rather than inheriting it. And 3, it means that we are likely to already be rooted in particular communities, though there are some of us that are empowered by the Spirit to go where we're called. We come into ministry with an abundance of gifts. We put our lives on pause to jump through candidacy hoops only to be met with the wait list for calls. And we can't go where calls might be in abundance, as I heard many of you here even talk about that there are vacancies in your communities. But oftentimes we can't go there because of socio-political climate where these calls might be. And what that means is that it might not be safe. So even when we do say yes to them, there is always the uncertainty of our safety lingering. And if we're not able to break into those areas, we're asked to wait. Now, again, I can imagine that for some of us here, that might feel unrealistic. How could a church community or, the place I grew up in, right, be a place of tension for non-white ministers? I look forward to what's coming out in the next few weeks. It's called Talks at the Desk. It's coming from African Descent Ministries. But in one of the conversations, I'm not sure this will be in the edits, a pastor talks about, a Black woman pastor talks about leading a congregation in rural Ohio. And she was called the N-word pastor. And she would get threats on a regular basis and was essentially chased out of her community. I served in the Metro Chicago area, in the city of Chicago, and that was actually the first place where I was called the N-word by another member of my church, 2 other members of my church. So every year we wait, every year that we wait, this also grows the wealth gap, between our counterparts. It adds another year of ministry to pay into retirement. And if we get halftime calls, that means for every 2 years that we work, we might make what someone else did in 1, leaving us to have to work further along into retirement age, if we even make it that long. So right now, our assignment process is set up so candidates come back to their home synods. And this is where that relates to the work of the DEM. And we're asking how we can cast visions for our synods that are prepared to receive Black and Brown candidates for ministry. Now, if like Nikki Faison goes into seminary in fall 2022, where do we hope she might land in spring 2026? And if in that vision, we can't envision a place for someone like Nikki, then where else is there a place for her? If she's been saying that she feels called to rural ministry, how are we looking at our colleagues and seeing if they have room in their synodical vision for her? And I know that a lot of folks, DEMs, bishops are kind of already having that conversational part. So what I'm really stressing here is the preparation part. And this is where our work comes in together. What then does the preparation look like on the ground? Obviously, there are temperature checks of pastors who might be retiring and seeing where other leaders may want to shift. But there's also a need for us to be preparing congregations for diverse leadership. And I don't only mean racially. How are we, pastors and congregants and leaders, lay leaders alike, equipping churches to receive the word from folks who do not reflect them? How are we giving them the tools to call out their own biases? How are we doing intentional work in worship and inviting diverse leaders to preach? Are pastors backing up their students and interns when they're getting challenged by the congregation, or are we leaving them out to dry? Now, if a congregation has only had white male leadership since its inception, but there are several women entering assignment in the next year, what work is being done beforehand to normalize a leader who may make more eye contact when they preach, or who asserts herself when someone calls her sweetie or hun, or by her first name instead of her title, or pushes back when she's typecasted for being the youth pastor? Now, I'm going to kind of pause there because I think this is really important. This is where all of our work comes in. If you are a roster leader right now and you're serving in a congregation, what intentional work are you doing to make sure that the person comes after you is in a safer predicament? I think this is probably one of the most important things, because if you look at who's in seminary right now, and I mentioned the woman part of being a woman leader, because even amongst the African descent community, majority of the candidates that I know right now are women. And I think that's a really awesome thing. And I think even in non-African descent spaces, we see a lot of that too. There are a lot of women that are going into ministry. So how are we, especially, and this is actually a women-dominated conversation right now, which is actually hilarious, but how are we then preparing our congregations to receive that word? And I'll give you an example of what I did before I left my congregation, and I wasn't prepared. I wasn't expecting to be leaving at that time. But going into 2021, I worked on a liberation lectionary. It was a lot of work, so I don't expect any of y'all to just make a lectionary. But what we did was that every month, you know how like next month's Black History Month, after that's Women's History Month, after that is Autism Awareness Month, after that is, I think, what's May? Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. June is Pride Month. You know, like and very much they are very superficial in the sense that it's like, oh yeah, this is a month that we're celebrating, but we don't actually do the intentional work to really give honor to it. But what we did in our lectionary was every month we curated Bible stories that fit into these pieces. So when we talked about Autism Awareness Month and disabilities, we did healing stories. But what was important, which made those healing stories subversive, was that we encouraged folks that have different disabilities to come and preach and to talk about how they receive that word and the ways that we can take that differently. So a big thing was like, to heal doesn't always mean to cure, right? When we talk about healing powers, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden, like your bones are no longer broken or that you no longer have cancer. The healing can happen with just finding peace within that, or no longer being put in situations where you are stigmatized for your disability. But when we preach and talk that, and we see people that come from these different backgrounds speak truth to that, that might be for the first time your congregation ever hears it. And that in itself can really start moving the, como se dice, the gears in one's head. And I'm not saying that representation is the only thing. And I know for many of us, we might be in really siloed communities where we can't just call in like the next pastor across the street, right? I'm talking about being in Chicagoland. But we are in a virtual world right now where we can tap onto people and we can put our money where our mouth is. And, you know, you don't have to just be off and say, oh, I need a supply preacher. You know, get a supply preacher when you're there. You know, give them praise when they're done at the end of that sermon. But I think that's important, especially in the congregation I was, because actually up until I was called, it had only been white men in the pulpit. And that's okay, right? Because they ended up calling me, but there was still more work that needs to be done in order for the next person to come up and feel safe and secure. As I just mentioned, I was called the N-word by a parishioner. So, you know, there's still room for us to grow. But these are just examples that I'm trying to give where laying down the work before we're done in our ministry can be really beneficial in whichever way that you want to go. And I think that's necessary. If we're looking at, you know, we're talking about a great resignation that, or not just a great resignation, excuse me, but there's going to be a mass retirement that happens soon. And honestly, in a lot of those places that are going to be impacted are going to be in our a little bit more spacious suburban or rural communities. And we need to be ready because the people that are coming up do not necessarily reflect what they've always had. And that's, again, okay. So the equipping of congregations for diverse leadership is actually really important, and not just how we call leaders, but also how seminarians first engage with congregations professionally. It should come to no surprise to any of us how often interns are abused by their internship sites. Whether it's the pastors themselves or the congregations, many interns are trapped in abusive situations for a year and have to deal with the trauma themselves. They often don't report it because they don't want to start over. And I want us to think about that too. You sign on to do this ministry for a year. If you do not finish, if you do not complete at least 9 months and you get pulled out, the chances are they're going to make you to start over, which means it's another year of your life without a salaried position. It's another year of your life where you are working for pennies. That's scary, especially when you've already put your life on pause. And this is not exclusive to my community. This has happened to a lot of different people. They may report it to the contextual ed director and a conversation might happen, but they rarely escalate it to a bishop. And when that does happen, how often do actual investigations or removals follow? And how often does that affluent church, because oftentimes internship sites come from more affluent churches, get another student and do it all over again? 2 years ago, before I even entered this role, I had over a handful of people disclose their internship abuse to me. I heard what was not done about it. I heard how it impacted an intern's sense of call. And I see how this abuse is treated as hazing almost in our church culture. And there's no reason why church harm is so normalized. So finally, I want to talk about investment. And again, all of us are pretty much either congregational pastors or lay leaders. So how much investment can we do? Unless some of y'all come from some affluent churches, then listen up, okay? But for many of our African descent communities, our churches are doing some of the most necessary outreach, whether it's affordable VBS in the summer, community gardens, food pantries, feeding ministries, or whatever. And that's not to say that non-Black congregations are not doing that work. This is more so about the location and what that actually means to the immediate community. Though poverty and struggle very much exist in the suburbs. I live in an inner circle kind of suburb where we have right now 2 community fridges and a pantry that goes empty every day. So I get that. But many of our churches are staples. And if they aren't, then we need to talk about how they become it. But many of our synods with dense African descent congregations are in urban settings. And there are synods where gentrification is coming fiercely. So when we think of our future church and innovative ideas, I implore us to listen more closely to these communities and see what we could do to support them. Selling churches in a place like gentrified Brooklyn instead of building affordable housing in the city is not only shameful, but harmful to thousands of people who are being displaced today. Leaving eyesore churches up and abandoning them in communities like Roseland in the Chicago area is truly an act of violence. And so every space the church takes up, property-wise, in a community takes away tax dollars. And it doesn't need to be a problem if we're providing for our communities. But when we are leaving vacant buildings that decay on blocks filled with other decaying signs of community, we're adding to the divestment and later on gentrification of a community. And if we're selling out these communities to the highest bidder, not only can we never afford to return to these areas, but we're participating in someone's disenfranchisement. In Churchwide's most recent apology to African descent community, we highlighted the need to properly fund Black leadership in Black communities. And I know that the greater church is not made out of money. Right now, we're in a time where giving is down. And I know all of us are expected to just save it. And I know that we can't do this work alone. But these are the things that are coming up in my findings, and these are what I feel really passionate about. And as we think of this expression of the church, I pray that we begin to prioritize co-creating an equitable church for all. And so what does that last part mean for our folks right here, right now, in terms of investment? Well, I'll say this. There's probably a few of y'all come from relatively stable churches, and maybe you come from a church where you could even afford to do a capital campaign to reinvest in your building. I think that's great. I think that's wonderful and necessary. All of our spaces are sacred spaces. But I can tell you right now, in places like New Orleans, where there is actually a significant housing crisis because of actual racist legislation, it has prevented folks from building upward, making it a low density community, which then when is a supply and demand need. So in a place like New Orleans, where you can't build up, you can only build where you are, and you're already underwater, so you can't really expand outward. it makes the cost of living there extremely high, where houses that probably in your area might go for like $300,000-400,000, maybe are going for $600,000 to $800,000. And these again are one floor, no basement, like communities. But there's a church out there that is actually working on a grassroots capital campaign to create 4 affordable housing units in their community. That's really great work. And so what does it look like for us who are in different places of power in our communities to like come alongside and like raise different offerings or run our own like partial capital campaigns to reinvest in those communities, and to support that kind of work, and not just to say, oh, we're the ones with the money and here are conditional guidelines to supporting you, but unconditionally saying this is valuable, and this needs to be a priority for us. I did a lot of talking here. And again, I know that this was very much centered around the things that I'm finding in my work in the African descent community. But the key points I really want to take away from this is, how are we succession planning in our congregations? How are we making sure that the person that comes next will have a fair shake at all of these things? I'm asking for us to take away how we can come alongside our additional, our other communities, and be a support to the work that they do if we're in a place to be able to do that. And finally, also, how do we also make sure that our congregations are safe congregations for interns? These are future leaders. And if you're a pastor here, you've been on internship, you know the hardships, you know it was challenging. And maybe because we've been in the ministry long enough, we kind of laugh at it now. But for the folks going through it in this moment, it's hard. And when you add the student loan debt, when you add the temporary displacement, when you add the waiting game and all these other things, we are in a different world. So I'm going to pause and take a breath. I would love it if we can actually take some time in some breakout rooms and talk amongst ourselves. What did we hear? Where do we feel? What did we hear? Where do we feel challenged? And where do we feel empowered? So yeah, I'll hand it over to our breakout champ. Yes.
Hey friends, welcome back to the space. I'm sure it felt short for you when conversations like that are rolling. Yeah, I'm seeing some heads shaking. So as is our habit, I invite you to consider unmuting and sharing. What are some things that that really shine for you in the conversation that you had? Of course, respecting the confidentiality of your small group partner, right? And what maybe are you still wondering about? What are you learning about yourself, your community? I invite you to share, friends.
I'll jump in. I was encouraged in sharing and reflecting with my group that the ways, I think what I heard from my group, or what the Spirit was saying to me, is that the ways in which I've had to step way back and meet my people where they are and slowly bring them forward, even though it feels completely frustrating and way behind where I want them to be, the little steps aren't in vain. That the baby bits, that the trying from where they are isn't worthless just because it feels so frustrating.
Yeah, amen, amen. Baby steps count, right, friends? We all started somewhere. Who's next?
I would just build on that to say that I think that depending on the particular congregation and its health, this work can be either impossible or have ability to take root. And some of that was described as to some of the spaces that are not even grace-filled, let alone safe or brave spaces. And when that ground is not prepared or that space is not available, then it becomes very difficult to be that voice that prophetic voice. So.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why we try to offer this space consistently. Yeah, to offer that safe space and that support. What else, friends?
Well, one of the things that I really appreciated in our discussion was, along with what Pastor Amanda said, is that we want things to happen faster than what it can, because we are probably, because we're attending these groups and stuff, we are probably light years ahead of many people who are in the pew, like it or not. And to hear that somebody called their pastor the N-word makes me cry. And so to know that that is out there is just appalling to me. So I, as a lay leader, have pushed and will continue to push my leadership and that to consider that succession plan. And when we were kind of talking about becoming an RIC congregation in our group, and when we did that, we started years before making inclusion and diversity for basically everything into our prayers, into the sermons. So our pastor was very good at relating the gospel to that inclusion and diverse message. And so when it came time to actually do the work of becoming an RIC congregation, it wasn't the first time they heard it. They had been, and it was kind of like a natural progression. It was also a part of when we called our new pastor and we said, okay, if you have to be willing to help us do this, or we don't want you. So that's kind of part of that succession plan. You have to be willing to help us move beyond, again, to do the next step, to continue to grow, and relating it back to the gospel. You know, when you start relating it back to the gospel, it's like you give them no leg to stand on to go against you. And I realize that's a little Pollyanna-ish. I do realize that. So, but
it's amending the soil, right? Yes. Oh, and we lost Nicolette already. Shoot, we didn't have a chance to thank her. Yeah, thank you for sharing those insights, Jill, for sure. How about one more sharing before we wrap up?
This is Janice. I really appreciated the colleagues that I spent time with, because I could see that each one of them had a place where they are now. When we talk about, you know, what can we do? Where do we feel empowered? You know, these are people who have put themselves in maybe some challenging areas in their life, or new areas, or growth areas, stretch areas. And it's that kind of orientation that I can see in their lives. That means they will hopefully challenge others and being able to move forward and taking those steps that we talk about. And I think that the challenge for me is, you know, as we talk about succession planning, or even just stretching our congregations to think about how do we look like the community around us, or the city or the town or the area we live. And what would that be? How would that be better if we had even more diversity? What would be better? How can we think about that? And to keep framing the questions in front of people. So that's what I would say. So thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Amen to all of that. I'm excited to see in the chat some of your other reflections and responses. And I want to share with you a phrase that Nicolette used with me in a conversation we had maybe it was 2 months ago now. She used the phrase preparing for newness. And this is something that I hope you will hear again and again as we move through 2022. I have used it several times since that conversation. And I think that there's something to that we are preparing for growing into more fullness of who God intends us to be as the body of Christ, something that we say every week when we gather. So thank you again. And Nicolette, if you listen to this recording, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your heart and your wisdom and your sacred experience as an African descent leader in the ELCA. I do hope that you join us again next Wednesday, the 26th at 1 p.m. Central. We again are continuing these weekly gatherings. We will welcome to the speaking space Becca Malmgren. She is Program Director for Economic Diversity and Poverty and Justice Ministries in the ELCA. So friends, thank you again for being with us. And I hope that you will hear, let me see if I can find this last quote from Martin Luther King Jr. Change does not roll on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. And so we must straighten our backs and work for freedom. Friends, God is calling us all to important and unique work. Please know, as I always say each week, that you are valued and loved, and we are here to support you in this journey. And again, I invite you to share in the chat what's one faithful step that you are taking this week. Thanks for being with us, friends. God bless you.